As a strategic analyst from India has noted recently that the COVID-19 pandemic must be a wake-up call. Wake-up call for whom? Wake-up call for the entire world. Wake-up call for what? Remember, the world has accepted China's shadow over the global supply chains for too long. He says that this has to be a wake-up call. The present crisis must be a wake-up call in order to address this issue. He says that only by replacing and only by at least reducing China's global economic influence, primarily beginning in the pharma sector, as this has been shaped out as one sector where it has shown indomitable dominance, that the world can be keep herself safe from the Chinese political pathologies. So we know that beyond the escalating global health emergency, which has already killed lakhs, the pandemic has disrupted the normal trade and travel. It has forced all the educational institutional closures. It has roiled the international financial system, and as you already know, it has sunk the global stock markets. So with oil prices also plunging, you must remember that the global recession is imminent, and now it has already set in according to statements from IMF. So none of this would have happened had China responded quickly to the evidence of the deadly new virus by warning the public and implementing containment measures. Indeed, you must also here remember the actions that have been taken up by Taiwan and Vietnam. They have shown the difference with a proactive response that can make to the entire global pandemic that we are facing now. Taiwan has already learnt its lessons from SARS. What happened then in 2002-2003? It has instituted preventive measures because of whatever the lessons that it has learned. Because of the secrecy that the China has maintained, Vietnam and Taiwan were the countries which have been affected even during that first pandemic that the century has seen. So by instituting the preventive measures, including flight inspections, before China's leaders had even acknowledged the outbreak, Taiwan could contain the widespread spread of the disease. So likewise, Vietnam also quickly halted flights from China and closed all the schools. Both responses recognized the need for transparency. So thanks to the policies of the governments from Taiwan and Vietnam, which normally receive huge number of travelers from Wuhan city particularly and China in general, they have kept their cases far below 100. So neighbors that were very slow to implement these similar measures, such as Japan and South Korea, they have been hit really hard because of their huge reliance on Chinese economy. This was unwarranted for Japan and South Korea. This is what we must remember, rather than Taiwan and Vietnam, which have lower dependence in comparison with Japan and South Korea. But if any other country would have triggered such a far-reaching, deadly and above all preventable crisis, you must remember that it would have become the seat of global widespread criticism. But China could escape such censure because of her tremendous economic clout that it has. Nonetheless, it will take considerable effort for China to really restore its standing not only at home but also abroad. So perhaps that is the reason why you find that Chinese leaders are publicly congratulating themselves for not limiting exports of medical supplies and also what is called as APIs used to make medicines, vitamins and vaccines. What are these APIs? They are regarded as active pharmaceutical ingredients. Active pharmaceutical ingredients. China has stated that it would simply be retaliating against any so-called unkind measure by the US government taken after COVID-19's emergence, such as restricting entry to the US by any Chinese or foreigners who had visited China. How could he issue such a statement? How could he talk about the implementation of trade restrictions, particularly with respect to whatever the important medical exports that are being made from China? Remember, what it has done is it has weaponized dominance. What does it mean? Weaponizing its dominance in global medical supplies, and particularly with respect to active pharmaceutical ingredients that we were referring to, is what China has consistently done throughout this period of statement that it would be rising peacefully in terms of economic development. Moreover, you must remember that this is not the first time that the China has considered weaponizing its dominance in global medical supplies and APIs. As I told you already, Chinese economists suggested curtailing Chinese API exports to USA as a countermeasure in the trade war itself that we have witnessed post the membership that has been withdrawn from WTO by USA. Because of these warnings, we must remember that that would be a possibility anytime soon. So USA, as a countermeasure, if it applies any sort of restrictions on the free trade, China has warned that it would impose restriction on API exports. So once the export is reduced, as these economists have noted, the medical systems of these developed countries and some of the developing countries will definitely not work. This is not an exaggeration, you must remember. Why? Recently, post-pandemic, the US Department of Commerce has studied the situation of the health sector, particularly the pharmaceutical sector in USA. It said that 97% of all antibiotics which are sold in USA have come from where? China. That means if you are the Chinese and if you want to really just destroy us, as they have noted, it is very, very simple for them by just stopping sending off these antibiotics. Because of this, the Trump administration has signed a $350 million 4-year contract with a particular new company in Richmond to manufacture generic medicines and pharmaceutical ingredients that are needed to treat COVID-19, but are now made overseas, mostly in China. So the contract meshes with President's call for America First, which is an economic promise that he has made, and the current coronavirus and its outbreak has clearly ensured that this America First comes to the forefront. If the specter of China exploiting its pharmaceutical clout for strategic ends were not enough to make the world think its cost-cutting outsourcing decisions, the unintended disruption of the global supply chains by COVID-19 should be. One must remember this. In fact, China has had no choice but to fall behind in producing and exporting APIs since the outbreak, a development that has contained global supply, and it has driven up the prices of vital medicines that are required for maintenance and sustenance of public health. So this has already forced India, the world's leading supplier of generic drugs, to restrict her own exports, and here they include some of the commonly used medicines. So if China's pharmaceutical plants do not return to full capacity soon, severe global medicinal shortages will become emerging situation. Remember, here the action of the India is very, very important. India imports 53 APIs and key starting materials from China, as it has been noted by the pharmaceutical associations from India. According to the Trade Promotions Council of India, India imports 70% of her trade API requirements from China. So mostly antibiotics and vitamins which are made are probably made with the inputs from China. So in 2018-2019 itself, as these India pharma companies imported bulk drugs and intermediaries that was worth of really $2.4 billion, which was from China. Because of this, China's Hubei province, which is seat of this entire imports that India has also become the focal point of COVID-19 outbreak in China, which is also a major supplier of APIs, and hence it has become an eye-opener for India. So the industry experts have here noted that the potential for production stoppages in China has really scared India's pharmaceutical industry. So what does India must do here? Here you must remember that the Chinese extreme influence in this entire global supply chain is the main cause for all these situations, and hence in a bid to limit what is seen as such an excessive dependence on active pharmaceutical ingredients from China, the Indian government has announced a particular scheme. In this particular scheme, which is a $395 million scheme, it wanted to promote the development of 3 bulk drug parks. So in the similar line that the American government has taken up in order to reduce the dependence on China for her pharmaceutical industry, India has also planned something similar to that. Secondly, the government also has put into plans and it has put into place a production linked incentive, which is called as PLI scheme, to boost domestic manufacturing of critical key starting materials. These KSMs are key drug intermediaries which are used to make bulk drugs. Remember this. Because of these 2 steps, remember, India has this ability now to replace the dependence on China. So the PLI would cost nearly $911.5 million over the next 8 years, as government has stated. So with this entire discussion as a summary, we must note some points here. Remember, in the past, the Chinese reliance on persuasion was very, very important. This persuasion has secured its admission into various international institutions like WTO, and it has helped China to emerge as a powerful economic nation. But under the leadership of Xi Jinping, what we find here is it is spreading disinformation, as we have observed. Secondly, it is exercising economic leverage. Thirdly, what we see here is it is trying to flex its military muscle. Fourthly, it is trying to ensure that it is running targeted influence operations. And number 5, it has become probably a country which has replaced diplomacy with aggression. So all these have become tools of Communist Party's propaganda apparatus, and it has also become the tools of Chinese complete influence, which is unreasonable over the world, which are depending on China's support. So this is the larger perspective from which we have to look at the Chinese ingression into India. And here we must remember that it is because of India's actions against all these new characteristics that the China has imbibed with herself, we must look at this entire issue. So here also, when we move further and look at how the Chinese incursions have occurred, remember, they have been the initial flare-ups with India in terms of the border. However, now it has raked up this issue to a much larger scale. How this has been done and how this particular incursion has its own characteristic contrasting from the earlier stand-up that we had must be looked at in the next session.